When a secluded farm becomes the target of a mysterious millionaire, a battle-scarred dog is the only hope for a defenseless girl. But how far will he go to protect her? The rising sun painted the sky of Aspen with shades of orange and pink. In the small, isolated farmhouse nestled in the mountains of Colorado, Emily was already awake, watching through her bedroom window as the dawn transformed the landscape. At 12 years old, she had developed the habit of waking early to savor every moment of the day, a way to compensate for the limitations her wheelchair imposed. "Max," she called softly, and the imposing German shepherd sleeping at the foot of her bed immediately lifted his head, alert to his young companion's voice. Max was no ordinary dog. His watchful eyes held stories from a past in law enforcement, where he had been trained for extreme situations. Now retired, he devoted himself entirely to being Emily's loyal guardian and friend. "Let's go outside. I want to see the flowers we planted yesterday," she said, skillfully maneuvering her wheelchair toward the door. In the kitchen, Sarah was preparing breakfast. At 38, she was a woman of simple beauty and determined resolve. Life hadn't been kind to her, but her inner strength had never let her give up, especially not for Emily. "Good morning, sweetheart. You're up early today," Sarah smiled, placing a plate of fresh fruit on the table. "It's just that the seeds we planted yesterday must be ready to sprout, right, Max?" Emily replied, stroking the head of the dog who followed her faithfully. The day's routine promised to be like so many others. Sarah would tend to the garden and household chores, while Emily worked on her studies at home, using the materials her teacher from town sent weekly. The farmhouse was far from the center of Aspen, making regular school attendance difficult for the girl. "Mum, do you think we'll ever have internet here? It would make studying easier," Emily asked as she helped set the table. "Maybe someday, honey. But for now we have to make do with what we have. Books are good companions, don't you think?" Sarah replied, always trying to find the bright side of things. The day passed uneventfully until, late in the afternoon, an unfamiliar car appeared on the dirt road leading to the farmhouse. Max, who had been playing with Emily in the garden, immediately went on alert, positioning himself between the girl and the approaching vehicle. From the luxurious car stepped out a tall man with an elegant and well-dressed appearance. Daniel Carter was how he introduced himself, a businessman passing through the area who had been captivated by the natural beauty of the place. "Good afternoon. I hope I'm not intruding," he said with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "I was admiring the scenery and noticed this property. It's truly charming." Sarah, initially wary, remained reserved. "Thank you, but we don't usually receive visitors. The ranch is quite isolated for that very reason," she replied, instinctively positioning herself closer to her daughter. "I completely understand. I don't mean to intrude." Daniel raised his hands in a peaceful gesture, but his eyes scanned the property with an interest that seemed to go beyond simple admiration. "Actually, I'm looking to invest in the area. Properties like this are rare these days." Hearing this, Sarah visibly tensed. The idea of selling the ranch had never crossed her mind. It was the only place where she felt safe with Emily. "We're not interested in selling, Mr. Carter," she replied firmly. Max, still watchful, let out a low growl, something he rarely did. Emily noticed the dog's unease and looked curiously at the visitor. There was something about the man's gaze that made her uncomfortable. "Of course, I completely understand." Daniel smiled again, now looking directly at Emily. "What an impressive dog you have. He seems very protective." "Max is family," Emily replied with a maturity that surprised the visitor. "He always knows when something isn't right." A tense silence hung between them, broken only by the sound of the wind in the trees surrounding the ranch. Daniel said his goodbyes, promising to return another day to talk further. As the car drove away, Max remained alert, his eyes fixed on the dust rising from the road. "I didn't like him, Mom," Emily confessed once the car was out of sight. "Neither did Max," Sarah noted, observing the dog's continued restlessness. "But don't worry, he won't be back." Yet something in Daniel's gaze had made it clear this wouldn't be his last visit to the mountain property. And Max, with his sharp instincts, seemed to be the only one who fully understood what that visit meant. If you're enjoying this story, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit like. Let us know which city you're watching from. Stay tuned. 3 days had passed since Daniel Carter's unexpected visit. Life at the property had returned to its usual rhythm, but something had changed. Max had started making nightly patrols around the perimeter, behavior Sarah had never noticed before. "He's different, Mom," Emily remarked over breakfast. "Last night I woke up and saw Max staring out the window like he was waiting for something." Sarah tried to mask her concern. "It's probably just his instincts, sweetheart. Remember, Max was trained to protect. It's in his blood." That morning, as Emily studied on the porch with Max faithfully lying at her feet, a delivery man arrived with an elegantly wrapped package. Inside was a state-of-the-art tablet and a card signed by Daniel Carter. "To help with your studies. A small gift, no strings attached." "We can't accept this, Emily," Sarah said, visibly unsettled by the businessman's unexpected gesture. "But Mom, you know how useful it would be for me," the girl argued, her eyes shining at the thought of accessing the internet and educational resources she'd longed for. "We don't know his true intentions," Sarah replied, taking the package, determined to return it. That same afternoon, as if sensing the rejection of his gift, Daniel Carter returned to the property. This time he arrived with an even broader smile and an offer that made Sarah hesitate. $200,000 for the property, he said bluntly. "I know it seems sudden, but I believe this amount could give you both a more comfortable life in the city. Emily would have access to specialized schools, tailored treatments." Sarah felt a tightness in her chest. The offer was tempting, and indeed city life could provide better opportunities for Emily. Yet the ranch represented security, a refuge she had built after years of hardship. "We need to think this through, Mr. Carter," she replied, trying to buy time. "Of course, I completely understand, and please call me Daniel," he smiled, stepping closer to Emily, who watched everything in silence. "And what about you, young lady? How do you feel about living in the city?" Before Emily could answer, Max positioned himself between her and Daniel, not aggressively but clearly setting a boundary. The businessman took a step back, his smile faltering for a moment. "Max is very protective," Daniel remarked, trying to maintain his composure. "He senses things we can't see," Emily replied with a calmness that made Daniel narrow his eyes. After the businessman left, Sarah handed the tablet to Emily. "We'll keep it for now. We'll decide later whether to return it." Night fell over the ranch, bringing with it an inexplicable unease. Max was more alert than ever, refusing to lie down, even after Emily had gone to bed. Sarah, noticing the dog's unusual behavior, decided to check the perimeter of the property before turning in. That's when she spotted a shadow moving among the trees surrounding the ranch. Her heart raced. Without making a sound, she hurried back inside, locked all the doors and windows, and called the only number she knew could help in that situation. "James? It's me, Sarah. I think someone's prowling around the ranch." On the other end of the line, the voice of James, an old friend and retired police officer, sounded concerned. "Lock everything down and stay alert. I'll be there in 20 minutes. James was the one who had given Max to Sarah and Emily 2 years earlier, when the dog retired from the police force. He knew the animal's capabilities better than anyone, and was aware that if Max was alert, there was reason for concern. While waiting, Sarah went to check on Emily. The girl was sleeping peacefully, oblivious to the tension hanging over the house. Max, however, was sitting near the girl's bed, his eyes fixed on the window, ears perked up. "What are you sensing, buddy?" whispered Sarah, stroking the dog's head. "What's out there?" In response, Max simply looked at her, intently, as if trying to communicate something beyond words. Sarah felt a shiver run down her spine. There was more to this situation than just a simple business interest in the ranch. When James arrived, he searched the entire property with a flashlight, accompanied by Max. They found no one, but the dog's behavior made it clear that something, or someone, had been there. "Sarah, do you know this Daniel Carter?" asked James once they were inside, sipping coffee. "Only what he told me, that he's a businessman interested in investing in the area." "Then why your ranch specifically? Isolated, far from the main road?" James frowned. "I'll look into who this guy really is." In the meantime, stay alert and trust Max. He's no ordinary dog, you know that. That night after James left, Sarah stayed awake for a long time, watching the moonlight softly illuminating Emily's room. Daniel's offer echoed in her mind, mixed with an uneasy feeling that there was far more to this story than she could see. Max, ever watchful, remained by Emily's bed, his eyes reflecting the moonlight streaming through the window, a silent guardian of secrets, yet to be uncovered. The morning after James's late-night visit, Emily woke up excited about the tablet she'd received. Sarah, despite the unease she felt, allowed her daughter to explore the device. Seeing Emily's smile as she discovered the possibilities the internet offered was a balm to her worries. "Look, Mum, there are lessons for everything here," the girl exclaimed, browsing an educational website. "History, science, math. I can learn so much more now." Sarah smiled, trying to shake off the feeling that Daniel's gift was a way to buy his way into their lives. "Remember, Emily, we have to return this if we decide not to sell the ranch." The girl's expression turned serious for a moment. "Are you thinking about selling, Mum?" Sarah sat beside her daughter, taking her small hands in hers. "I'm just considering all the possibilities, sweetheart. Life in the city could offer more opportunities for you, better doctors, a specialized school." "But I like it here," Emily interrupted. "Here we have space, we have Max, we have our garden and our peace. In the city, everything would be different." Max, as if understanding the conversation, approached and rested his head on Emily's lap. The girl stroked the dog's soft fur, finding comfort in his steady presence. In the middle of the afternoon, an unfamiliar car parked near the ranch's entrance. It wasn't Daniel's luxury vehicle, but a simpler model. A middle-aged woman stepped out carrying a document folder. "Good afternoon. I'm looking for Sarah Santos," she said, introducing herself as Lisa, a real estate agent. Sarah, surprised, greeted the woman on the porch. "Yes, that's me. How can I help you?" "Mr. Carter asked me to bring a formal offer for the property," explained Lisa, pulling documents from her folder. "He increased the offer to 300,000 Rs and is willing to arrange accommodations for you and your daughter in town during the transition period." The offer was substantially higher than the previous one, and Sarah felt her heart race. With that money, she could provide a more secure future for Emily. Yet, something about Daniel's insistence still bothered her. "I'll review the proposal," she replied cautiously. "But I haven't made any decision about selling the ranch yet." "Of course I understand," Lisa smiled, leaving the documents with Sarah. "Mr. Carter also asked me to give you this." She handed over a small gift-wrapped package. Inside, Sarah found a brand new smartphone with a card that read, "To make communication easier." After the agent left, Sarah examined the documents. The offer was tempting, but the conditions seemed oddly specific. Daniel wanted the property transferred in an extremely short time frame, and there was a clause stating that all contents of the ranch, including furniture and personal belongings, had to remain in place. "Why does he want our things?" Sarah murmured to herself. Meanwhile, Emily had gone out with Max to explore the garden. The girl had always had a special connection with nature, and the adapted wheelchair James had built for her allowed her to move relatively easily across the flat terrain around the house. It was during this walk that Emily found something strange near the back fence of the property, a carefully folded piece of paper tucked into one of the posts. Curious, she pulled it out and unfolded it. The message, written in hurried handwriting, read only, "Be careful who approaches you." Beside her, Max let out a low growl, his eyes fixed on the stretch of woods beyond the fence. Emily felt a chill run down her spine. "What is it, Max? Is someone there?" she whispered, suddenly fearful. The dog stayed alert, but didn't advance. After a few moments, it seemed to relax slightly, though it remained watchful. Emily tucked the paper into her pocket and decided to head back home. Something told her that message was important, but she didn't know if she should show it to her mother. Sarah was already worried enough. When she walked inside, she found her mother on the phone with James. "Yes, he increased the offer. No, he didn't say why he wants the property so badly." Sarah paused, listening to what James said on the other end. "Did you find out anything about him?" Emily waited, feeling the tension rise inside her. Sarah's expression shifted during the call, moving from concern to something like restrained fear. "I see. Yes, we'll stay alert. Thank you, James." After hanging up, Sarah noticed her daughter's presence. "How long have you been there?" "I just got here," Emily replied hesitantly. "What did James find out?" Sarah took a deep breath before answering. "Apparently, Daniel Carter isn't who he claims to be. James couldn't find any concrete information about him in the business records. It's like he appeared out of nowhere a few years ago." Emily felt the weight of the paper in her pocket, but decided not to mention the message she'd found. She didn't want to add to her mother's worries. "Max senses something off about him, Mom. And you know Max is never wrong." Sarah looked at the dog, who remained by Emily's side, protective as ever. In the animal's eyes, she could see an almost human intelligence, an understanding that went beyond instinct. "Let's trust Max then," she finally said. "And we'll be very careful with this Daniel Carter." That night, while Emily slept, Sarah sat on the porch with Max by her side, gazing at the stars shining brightly in the mountain sky. Daniel's offer lingered in her mind, along with James's words on the phone. "Be careful, Sarah. This man is hiding something, and it might be connected to the past you left behind." "Sarah, you need to tell me the truth," James insisted the next morning, sitting at the kitchen table. His face, marked by years of police service, showed a seriousness that made Sarah shudder. Emily had been sent to the garden with Max, allowing the adults to talk in private. The girl, however, sensed something serious was happening. Before leaving, she noticed how pale and tense her mother looked. "There's nothing to tell, James," Sarah replied, avoiding her friend's probing gaze. "We came here 5 years ago looking for peace, you know that. What I know is that you showed up out of nowhere, buying this ranch in cash, with no explanations about your past," James pressed, leaning forward. "And now, coincidentally, a mysterious man appears, offering a fortune for this specific place. You don't believe in coincidences, do you?" Sarah stood abruptly, walking to the window. Outside, Emily played with Max, her laughter ringing in now, her mother's ears like a painful reminder of what was at stake. "I just wanted to protect her," she murmured finally, more to herself than to James. "Protect her from what? From who?" James stepped closer, placing a comforting hand on Sarah's shoulder. "I can't help if I don't know what we're up against." Sarah took a deep breath, gathering the courage to reveal what she had kept hidden for so long. "Before coming to Aspen, I worked as an accountant for a company in Colorado. A company that, I discovered too late, was just a front for money laundering." James nodded, encouraging her to continue. "When I realized what was happening, it was already too late. I had access to all the accounts, all the records. They considered me trustworthy, but—" Her voice faltered for a moment. "When I got pregnant with Emily, I started rethinking everything. I didn't want my daughter growing up in that environment." "Did you report it?" Sarah shook her head. "Worse. I copied all the records as insurance and ran away. A week later, the company was shut down in a police operation, but the main people involved were never caught. I used the money I'd saved to buy this place and build a new life for us." James processed the information, connecting the dots. "And you think Daniel is connected to that company?" "I don't recognize him, but—" Sarah hesitated. "The way he showed up, his insistence on buying the property, everything suggests he might be looking for something I left behind." "The records you copied?" Sarah nodded, biting her lip. "They're hidden here, somewhere on the ranch." In the garden, Emily watched the conversation through the window. She couldn't hear what they were saying, but her mother's expression was enough to know something was very wrong. In her pocket, the mysterious note seemed to grow heavier by the second. "Max, what's going on?" she whispered to the dog, who remained alert by her side. In response, Max let out a short bark and stood up, his ears perked. Someone was approaching. Daniel Carter appeared on the path leading to the ranch, this time accompanied by another man, tall and stern-faced. Before they could get any closer, Max positioned himself in front of Emily, his body tense, ready to defend. "Hello, Emily," Daniel greeted with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Is your mother home? I brought a friend who's also interested in the property. She's busy, the girl replied, feeling a courage she didn't know she had. And Max doesn't like visitors much. The dog, as if confirming Emily's words, let out a low, threatening growl. The man accompanying Daniel took a step back, visibly uneasy. Control your dog, girl, he said in a rough voice, or we'll have to take action. At that moment, the front door opened and James appeared, followed by Sarah. Seeing Daniel and his companion, James immediately took a defensive stance. Can I help you, gentlemen? He asked with the authority of someone who'd spent years in police command. Daniel seemed momentarily surprised by James's presence, but quickly regained his composure. Just came to check if Mrs. Santos has considered. My offer? He replied with false courtesy. We're still considering it, Sarah interjected, stepping closer to Emily and placing protective hands on her daughter's shoulders. I need more time. Time, unfortunately, is something we don't have much of, Daniel retorted, his tone now sharper. My offer is generous, but it has a deadline. And if the answer is no? Challenged James, stepping forward. The man beside Daniel moved slightly, briefly revealing the outline of a gun under his jacket. Max immediately grew even more alert, his muscles tense beneath his fur. That would be a shame, replied Daniel, his smile fading, especially considering how much Miss Emily could benefit from the resources only the city can offer. The veiled threat made Sarah tighten her grip on her daughter's shoulders. Give us until the end of the week, she said, trying to buy time. Daniel considered the proposal for a moment before nodding. Until Friday, then. But there will be no more extensions. As the two men walked away, Emily finally revealed the note she had found. Mom, I found this yesterday near the fence, she said, handing the crumpled paper to Sarah. Be careful who approaches you. James and Sarah exchanged worried glances. Wasn't it either of you who wrote this? Asked Emily, confused. No, sweetheart, replied Sarah, examining the paper. But whoever left this is trying to warn us. Or scare us, mused James. We need to find out who this Daniel Carter really is and what he wants with this ranch. That night, after Emily finally fell asleep, following hours of restlessness, Sarah and James spoke in hushed tones in the living room. You have to leave here, Sarah, insisted James. Take Emily somewhere safe while I handle this. And go where? She shot back, desperate. This is the only place we've felt safe in the last 5 years. I can't just disappear again. Max, who was lying near the door of Emily's room, suddenly lifted his head, his ears alert. Seconds later, the sound of footsteps on the gravel path confirmed his suspicions. Someone was prowling around the ranch again. If you're enjoying this story, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit like. Let us know which city you're watching from. Let's continue. Max was the first to react to the footsteps approaching the house. His low, steady growl alerted James and Sarah, who immediately turned off the lights and positioned themselves strategically. Stay here and stay quiet, James whispered to Sarah, pulling a small gun from the holster hidden under his jacket. I'll check outside with Max. Be careful, she pleaded, her heart racing as she watched her friend and the dog move silently toward the back door. The night was clear, lit by an almost full moon that bathed the ranch in silver light. James signaled to Max, who immediately understood the command and moved ahead, following an invisible trail to human eyes, but perfectly clear to his sharp senses. Meanwhile, Sarah crept toward Emily's room, ready to protect her daughter at any cost. The girl slept, unaware of the tension hanging over the house. Sarah gently stroked her hair, silently promising that no harm would come to her little one. Outside, Max had stopped near the abandoned barn, his eyes fixed on the worn wooden structure. James approached cautiously, gun in hand, all his senses on high alert. When he was just a few feet from the entrance, a shadow moved inside the barn. Police, identify yourself, James ordered, instinctively falling back on the command he'd used during years of service. A tense silence followed, broken only by the soft sound of wind in the trees. Then, slowly, a figure emerged from the darkness of the barn, hands raised in surrender. Don't shoot, please, came a trembling, frightened woman's voice. James kept his gun raised, wary. Who are you? What are you doing here? The woman took another step forward, revealing herself in the moonlight. She was young, maybe, in her 30s, and her face showed signs of exhaustion and fear. "My name is Anna," she replied, still with her hands raised. "Anna Bennett. I worked with Sarah in Colorado." The name had an immediate impact on James. It was the connection to Sarah's past, the one she had tried so hard to leave behind. Max, though still vigilant, had relaxed slightly, indicating he didn't consider the woman an immediate threat. "What do you want here?" asked James, lowering his gun slightly. "To warn her," Anna answered, her eyes darting nervously around. "They found her, James, and they won't stop until they get what they want. How do you know my name?" "I've been watching the ranch for 3 days. I saw you arrive, overheard conversations." She hesitated. "I was the one who left the note for the girl." Inside the house, Sarah watched through the window as James interacted with the stranger. Her heart froze when she recognized Anna's profile, her old co-worker, the only person besides her who knew the full extent of the company's financial operations. Making a quick decision, Sarah locked Emily's bedroom door and stepped out into the garden. When Anna saw her, she paled even further. "Sarah," she murmured, her voice a mix of relief and dread, "you haven't changed a bit." "What are you doing here, Anna?" asked Sarah, keeping a safe distance. "Did you come to turn me in?" Anna shook her head vehemently. "No, I came to warn you. They know where you are, they know about the files, and they're determined to get them back." She paused, swallowing hard. "Robert is dead, Sarah, and Richard has taken control of everything." The mention of Richard's name made Sarah stagger, as if she'd been struck physically. James immediately steadied her, concerned by her reaction. "Who's Richard?" he asked, guiding Sarah to a nearby bench. "The real mastermind behind the operation," Sarah replied weakly, "and Emily's biological father." The revelation hit the small group like a bomb. James stared at Sarah in shock, while Anna nodded grimly. "He never knew about the pregnancy," Sarah continued, regaining some composure. "We broke up before I found out, and when I realized the kind of man he really was, I decided my daughter would never know the truth." "But now he does," Anna interjected. "Somehow he found out about Emily, and he's using Daniel, his right-hand man, to get close to you. Daniel isn't just after the files, he's after Emily," James concluded, now understanding the gravity of the situation. Max, who had been listening intently, suddenly lifted his head, ears alert. A second later, the distinct sound of an engine approaching on the dirt road reached the group's ears. "Quick, inside," ordered James, taking the lead. "Anna, you're coming with us." Inside the house, they found Emily awake, seated in her wheelchair near the bedroom door. Her wide eyes showed she had overheard part of the conversation. "Mom," she called with a shaky voice. "Who is Richard?" Sarah felt her heart shatter at her daughter's innocent question. How could she explain everything now in the middle of a crisis? How could she tell the girl that the man hunting them was her biological father? "It's a long story, sweetheart," she replied, stepping closer and hugging her daughter, "and I promise to tell you everything once we're safe." "They're here," announced James, who was watching through the window. 2 cars had parked near the entrance of the ranch. From one, Daniel stepped out, accompanied by the burly man they had seen earlier. From the other emerged a figure Sarah hadn't seen in years but recognized instantly. Richard Dawson, the man she had once loved, and who now posed the greatest threat to everything she held dear. Max positioned himself protectively in front of Emily, his body tense, ready to defend. In the dog's gaze was an almost human understanding of the approaching danger. "I need to access the files," Sarah said suddenly, moving to a specific spot in the room. "They're our only bargaining chip now." As James and Anna prepared for the imminent confrontation, Sarah shifted one of the paintings on the wall, revealing a small built-in safe. Her fingers trembled as she spun the combination dial. Outside, Richard advanced toward the house, his impassive face illuminated by the moonlight that bore witness to the reunion that would forever change the fate of this family. Time seemed suspended as Sarah opened the hidden safe, her shaky hands finally revealing a small hard drive and an envelope of documents kept hidden for so many years. She quickly placed everything into a bag and handed it to James. "If anything happens to me, take Emily far away from here," she said with the determination only a mother protecting her child could possess. James nodded gravely, tucking the bag inside his jacket. "No one will lay a hand on the girl," he promised, positioning himself strategically near the window, his weapon ready. Anna, who watched the scene with growing anxiety, stepped closer to Emily. "Don't be afraid," she murmured. To the girl, "Your mother is the strongest woman I've ever known." Footsteps approached the porch. Max stood guard, his muscles tense beneath his soft fur, ready to defend the family he considered his own. Sarah took a deep breath, trying to calm her heart, which felt like it might leap from her chest. "Stay here, Emily," she instructed, kissing her daughter's forehead. "Don't leave for anything in this world." Then, with a courage she didn't know she had, she walked to the door and opened it before the bell could even ring. On the porch, illuminated by the light from inside the house, stood Richard Dawson, the man who had once been everything to her, and now represented her worst nightmare. "Sarah," he said in a soft voice that contrasted with the threat he posed, "it's been a while. You're even more beautiful." "What do you want, Richard?" she asked directly, standing firm despite the tremor she felt inside. A cold smile curved his lips. "Aren't you going to invite me in? After all, we're old friends, aren't we?" "We were, a long time ago," she replied, not moving from the doorway. "Answer me, what do you want?" Richard sighed, his gaze sweeping over the house's facade before returning to Sarah's face. "I want what's mine, the files and—" He paused, his eyes gleaming with something indefinable. "And to meet my daughter." The shock of that explicit statement made Sarah pale. How could he know with such certainty? "I don't know what you're talking about." She tried to deny, but her trembling voice betrayed her. "Don't insult my intelligence, Sarah," Richard replied, his tone hardening. "I've had people watching you for years. It just took me a while to connect all the dots. Emily's age, the time of your escape. It wasn't hard to do the math." From inside the house, Emily had managed to move her chair to a spot where she could see and hear everything. Her young heart raced as she understood what that conversation meant. The man at the door was her biological father. The man her mother had feared so much. The man behind Daniel and his persistent offers. Max, noticing Emily had moved, quietly stepped closer to her, as if to remind her she wasn't alone. "She's not part of this," Sarah said firmly. Her eyes locked on Richard's. "Leave her out of it." "On the contrary," he countered, taking a step forward. "She's the most important part. The files are just a bonus now. I want to meet my heir." At that moment, James appeared beside Sarah, his presence a clear statement that Richard wouldn't advance any further. "That's not happening," he stated authoritatively. "I suggest you leave now, before things get unpleasant." Richard laughed, a dry, humorless sound. A retired cop defending a criminal. He provoked. "Sarah is hiding evidence of financial crimes. Did you know that? She stole confidential documents from my company." "The company you used for money laundering?" James retorted. "Interesting defense." Richard's smile vanished. "Daniel," he called without taking his eyes off the two at the door. Immediately, Daniel and the burly man stepped forward, flanking Richard like well-trained bodyguards. The tension in the air was palpable, like the calm before a devastating storm. Inside the house, Emily watched the scene with growing dread. For the first time, she saw her mother truly cornered, and the feeling was terrible. Without a second thought, she pushed her chair forward, appearing at the door beside Sarah. "Emily!" Sarah exclaimed, horrified. "Go back inside now." But the girl didn't back down, her curious, frightened gaze fixed on Richard, studying the face of the man she had just discovered was her biological father. "Are you Richard?" she asked with a courage that surprised everyone. A slow smile spread across the man's lips as he crouched slightly, meeting the girl at eye level. "Yes, that's me, and you must be Emily. It's a pleasure to finally meet you." "Why are you scaring my mum?" she asked directly, with the disarming honesty only a child could muster. The question seemed to catch Richard off guard. For a brief moment, a shadow of genuine emotion crossed his face. "I don't want to scare anyone," he replied in a softer tone. "I just came to take what's mine." "The documents?" Emily inquired. "Or are you talking about me?" The girl's sharpness made Richard raise his eyebrows in surprised admiration. Sarah placed a protective hand on her daughter's shoulder, trying to steer her away from the door. "We should talk inside," Richard suggested, seeing an opportunity. "Like a civilized family." "You're not family," Anna interjected. Appearing behind Emily, her presence made Richard's expression harden. "Anna, what an unpleasant surprise. I thought you'd learned your lesson after what happened to Robert." The veiled threat didn't go unnoticed. James stepped forward, positioning himself between Richard and the women. "Enough talk. You have two choices. Turn around and leave, or face the consequences." Richard laughed again, glancing at his men before responding. "You're outnumbered, officer, and I'm sure you don't want to traumatize the girl with a violent scene. Why don't we make this easy?" He turned to Sarah. "The files in exchange for my promise to leave you all alone afterward. A fair deal." "I don't trust you," Sarah replied firmly. "Then trust my self-interest. I have a reputation to maintain now. Legitimate. Businesses I've built. All I want is to erase evidence of my past and," he glanced at Emily, "meet my daughter." At that moment, Max, who had been silently standing beside Emily, stepped forward, positioning himself between the girl and Richard. His sharp eyes locked onto the man, as if assessing every move, every intention. "He doesn't like you," Emily observed, her hand resting on the dog's head. "And Max is never wrong about people." Richard stared at the animal, a slight discomfort in his gaze. "Dogs are territorial," he remarked dismissively. "He'll get used to me." "No, he won't," Emily stated with conviction. "Because you're not a good person. That's why Mom ran away." The girl's bluntness brought a tense silence. Richard straightened, something cold and calculating returning to his eyes. "Enough games," he declared, his voice losing any trace of kindness. "I want the files, and I want my daughter. And I'll get both, one way or another." The atmosphere grew heavy with Richard's threat, everyone on the porch aware the situation could explode at any moment. The burly man beside Daniel made an almost imperceptible move toward his coat, but Max was faster. With a deep, guttural growl, the German shepherd stepped forward, placing himself fully in front of Emily, his body tense like a coiled spring. The message was clear. Any threat to the girl would go through him first. James seized the moment to react. "Everyone, stay calm," he said with authority, his hand discreetly on his weapon. "Richard, you're making a mistake. Think carefully about what you're doing." Emily, with a maturity beyond her years, turned to Richard. "If you really are my biological father, why are you acting like this? Fathers don't threaten, they protect." The simple yet profoundly true words seemed to strike Richard in a way no threat ever could. For a moment his expression wavered, as if some part of him, perhaps long buried, recognized the wisdom in those words. Sarah seized that moment of hesitation to make an offer. "Let's settle this civilly," she said, keeping her voice steady despite her fear. "I have the files and I'm willing to hand them over, but under conditions." Richard raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "What conditions?" "You sign a document renouncing any rights to Emily and promise never to—" "Come near us again," Sarah replied firmly. "In return, I'll give you all the original files and any copies I've made." Anna, who had been silently observing everything, was surprised by Sarah's boldness. She knew Richard well enough to understand he didn't accept conditions, he imposed them. But something about that night was different. Richard's gaze shifted between Sarah and Emily, as if wrestling with something even he didn't fully understand. "What if I want to be part of her life?" he finally asked, his voice barely audible. The question took everyone by surprise. It didn't sound like the calculating, threatening man from moments before, but like someone genuinely uncertain. "This isn't a negotiation about visitation rights," Sarah shot back, recovering from her shock. "You lost that right when you chose the path you took." "I didn't even know she existed," Richard exclaimed, his voice rising for the first time. "How could I have made that choice?" "Exactly," Sarah replied coldly. "You had already made your choices before even knowing about her. You chose dirty money, illegal operations, chose to be the kind of man I needed to protect my daughter from." Sarah's words hung in the air like a final verdict. Richard seemed about to retort when Emily intervened again. "Could you ask what?" "I think." Her small but clear voice silenced everyone. "After all, you're talking about me as if I weren't even here." Sarah looked at her daughter with a mix of pride and worry. She had raised a strong, determined girl, but she was witnessing a moment that could define her little one's future. "You're right, sweetheart," she agreed, kneeling beside the wheelchair. "What do you think about all this?" Emily took a deep breath, her eyes scanning each adult's face before settling on Richard. "I don't know you," as she began honestly. "Mum never talked about my father, but I always imagined he'd be someone good, someone who'd protect us, not someone who shows up with scary people and makes threats." Richard seemed to take those words like a physical blow. His face, hardened by the life he'd lived, showed undeniable vulnerability for the first time. "Max always knows who's dangerous," Emily continued, stroking the fur of the dog still standing guard. "And he doesn't trust you. That means a lot to me." "Dogs can be wrong," Richard murmured, but his voice had lost its earlier conviction. "Not Max," Emily replied with absolute certainty. "He was trained to recognize dangerous people, and he's never been wrong." Heavy silence followed the girl's words. Max, as if understanding he was being discussed, kept his watchful gaze fixed on Richard and his men, especially the burly one who had reached for his coat. It was Daniel who broke the silence, stepping forward. "Enough talk. We've got a job to do, Richard. The files now, or things are going to get difficult." Your words seemed to stir something in Richard, as if reminding him of the original purpose of that visit. The vulnerable expression vanished, replaced by a cold business mask. "Daniel is right," he declared, hardening his tone. "This has gone on long enough. The files, Sarah, now." James, who had remained vigilant throughout the conversation, positioned himself strategically. "Do you really want this to end in violence? In front of your daughter?" The mention of Emily seemed to hit a nerve in Richard. He looked at the girl again, at her determined face, despite the evident fear in her eyes. Something about that image, his daughter in a wheelchair facing him, with courage, touched a part of his being he had long thought buried. "Give me the files," he said finally, his tone more restrained. "And I promise I'll never bother you again." "Your word means nothing to me," Sarah replied firmly. "Then what do you suggest? A contract?" Richard asked sarcastically. "Exactly." The direct answer surprised everyone. Sarah continued, "Anna is a witness to everything you've done. If you ever come looking for us again, she'll take all the evidence to the authorities." Anna, understanding her role in that improvised plan, nodded with determination. Richard considered his options for a moment, his calculating gaze assessing each person present. "You've always been clever, Sarah," he remarked at last, a humorless smile curling his lips. "That's why I chose you all those years ago." "And that's why I ran," she shot back. "Why, because I realized who you really were before it was too late." At that moment, Max suddenly became even more alert, his body completely tense, the growl in his chest deeper and more threatening. His eyes were fixed on the burly man accompanying Richard, who had made another subtle move. James noticed the change in the dog's behavior and immediately understood the danger. "Get back!" he shouted, pushing Sarah and Emily's wheelchair backward, just as the man drew a gun from his coat. What happened next was so fast that later, no one could describe it accurately. Max, like a swift shadow, lunged at the armed man the instant he aimed the gun at Sarah and Emily. The gunshot echoed through the quiet night of the ranch, followed by the sounds of struggle and fierce barking. Max, trained to neutralize threats, had struck with precision, taking the man down and disarming him in seconds. Richard, amid the chaos, found himself face to face with the reality of what his subordinate had tried to do, shoot in the presence of his daughter, possibly hitting her in the process. His face paled as he grasped what could have happened. The shot had echoed across the ranch, startling the birds sleeping in the branches of nearby trees. On the porch, time seemed to have frozen. Max had immobilized the burly man, who now lay on the ground, disarmed and unable to move under the weight and strength of the German shepherd. The gun had fired upward during the struggle, luckily injuring no one. James quickly retrieved the fallen weapon, aiming it at Daniel, who had taken a few steps back, visibly shaken by the sudden turn of events. Your man just attempted murder, James said with the authority of his years on the police force. This changes everything, Richard. Richard Dawson was pale, his gaze fixed on Emily, who trembled in her wheelchair, shielded by Sarah's arms. The reality of what could have happened if Max hadn't acted so swiftly seemed to hit him with full force. I didn't authorize this, he murmured, turning to the fallen man. I never gave orders to use weapons, especially with the girl present. But you brought armed men into a house where your daughter lives. Anna pointed out indignantly. What did you expect would happen, Richard? Her words seemed to awaken something inside him. Richard looked at his hands, as if suddenly realizing what he had become, the monster he had created with his own choices. Emily could have been hurt, said Sarah, her voice trembling with anger and fear. The daughter you claim to want to know could have been harmed by the man you brought. Richard swallowed hard, his mask of coldness completely shattered. He looked at Emily, at the frightened face of the girl who carried his genes, and something inside him seemed to break. I'm sorry, he said, the words sounding strange on his lips, as if he rarely spoke them. This never should have come to this. Max, still pinning the fallen man, remained alert to any movement, his experienced eyes scanning each person, assessing the level of threat. James, equally vigilant, didn't lower his weapon. What happens now? Asked Daniel, suddenly seeming smaller, less threatening without the imposing presence of his armed accomplice. It was Emily who answered, surprising everyone. You leave and never come back, she declared, with an impressive firmness for someone so young. And you leave my mother alone. Richard looked at his daughter, seeing in her a determination he recognized as his own, something that, under different circumstances, might have been a source of pride. It's not that simple, Emily, he began, trying to regain control of the situation. There are things you don't fully understand. We understand enough, Sarah interrupted. You came for the files and found out about Emily. Now you're trying to use our daughter as an excuse for your actions. Our daughter? Richard repeated, a spark of anger returning to his eyes. You hid her from me for years, Sarah. Years I can never get back. Years where she grew up safe, far from the world you created, Sarah shot back. Look at what just happened. Is this the kind of father you'd be? The words hit Richard like a physical blow. He looked again at Emily, at her determined face despite the fear, at the wheelchair that limited her physically but clearly didn't diminish her spirit. I would have been different with her, he murmured, more to himself than to the others. At that moment, distant sirens began to echo, rapidly approaching down the rural road. Anna had discreetly used the phone during the chaos, alerting the authorities. The police are coming, announced James, a slight triumphant smile on his face. Your man will be arrested for attempted murder, and you have a lot to explain, Richard. Panic flashed across Richard's face. Everything he'd built over the years, the facade of a respectable businessman, the political connections, the seemingly legitimate life, all of it would be at risk if he were implicated in a criminal case. We can work this out, he said quickly, his tone now almost pleading. Sarah, please, we don't need to involve the authorities. Sarah studied the face of the man she once loved, now seeing only a distorted reflection of the ambitious young man she'd fallen for. The sirens grew louder, time running out for everyone. There's a way out, she said finally, her voice steady. Her deal. I'm listening, Richard replied, tense. You sign a document right now relinquishing any rights to Emily. In exchange, I hand over the files and don't testify against you for what happened here today. What about my man? He answers. For his own actions, James interjected. There's no negotiation on that. Richard quickly weighed his options, the sirens drawing nearer. He looked at Daniel, who seemed equally desperate, then at the man still pinned down by Max. All right, he finally agreed. But I at least want the chance to explain to Emily someday when she's older. I want her to understand that I'm not the monster you all painted me to be. Sarah looked at her daughter, leaving the decision in her hands. Emily considered the request for a moment, her wise beyond her years eyes meeting Richard's. When I turn 18, she finally said, if I want to, I'll come find you myself. But it'll be my choice, not yours." A mix of pain and relief crossed Richard's face. It wasn't what he'd hoped for, but it was more than he deserved, and he knew it. "I accept," he agreed, extending his hand to seal the deal. Sarah quickly went to fetch the documents while James kept watch. Within minutes, an improvised contract was signed, the files exchanged, and Richard prepared to leave with Daniel, leaving the armed man to face the consequences of his actions. Before leaving, Richard stopped in front of Emily one last time. "I hope one day you'll see me beyond my mistakes," he said softly. "I hope one day you'll deserve that," she replied with a maturity that made Richard lower his gaze. The sirens were already at the property's entrance when Richard's car disappeared into the darkness of the rural road, taking with it the files that had been Sarah's primary concern for so long. 6 months had passed since the night of the confrontation. The ranch seemed more alive than ever, with colorful flowers lining the path to the main house. Emily, seated in her wheelchair on the porch, watched the sunset with Max faithfully by her side. "What are you thinking about?" asked Sarah, joining, her daughter with 2 mugs of hot chocolate. "About how everything's changed, yet somehow stayed the same," Emily replied, her eyes following a bird flying across the orange sky. "We're still here. We still have each other and Max." "But we feel lighter," Sarah finished, perfectly understanding what her daughter meant. James appeared around the bend in the path, carrying some tools. Since that night, he'd started visiting the ranch more often, helping with repairs and, little by little, becoming a constant and welcome presence in their lives. "The new security system is installed," he announced, joining the 2 on the porch. "Now you're truly protected." Max lifted his head at the sound of James's voice, wagging his tail slightly in recognition. The bond between the retired officer and the dog had grown even stronger after the events of that night. "We heard from Anna today," Sarah commented, handing James a mug. "She's settled well in Chicago with a new job and finally a normal life." "What about Richard?" James asked cautiously. "No news," Sarah replied, her gaze meeting Emily's. "And that's a good thing." Emily nodded, stroking Max's head. The dog had become even more protective after everything, as if he fully understood his role in this family. "Max knew all along," the girl said thoughtfully. "From the beginning, he sensed something was wrong with Daniel, with Richard. Max always knew," James agreed with a smile. "He was trained to recognize threats, but what he feels for you goes far beyond any training." The dog, as if understanding they were talking about him, moved closer to Emily, resting his head on her lap. His eyes, intelligent and loyal, seemed to say everything words couldn't express. "Mom," Emily called after a moment of thoughtful silence, "do you think I'll ever want to meet him? Richard, I mean." Sarah considered the question carefully. Before answering, "That will be your decision when the time comes, and whatever you choose, I'll be by your side." "We will," James gently corrected, his hand finding Sarah's in a gesture Emily didn't miss. The girl smiled, sensing what was blossoming between her mother and James. A new possibility, a fresh start for all of them. The sun finally disappeared below the horizon, giving way to the first stars of the night. Emily looked up at the sky, feeling a peace she hadn't known in a long time. "Max," she called softly, and the dog immediately turned to her, as attentive as ever. "Thank you for protecting us." In response, Max moved even closer, his warm body a constant comfort against the cool evening breeze. He wasn't just a dog, not just a trained protector. He was family in the truest sense of the word. The mountain ranch, once just a refuge, a hiding place, was now truly a home, a place of new beginnings, of fresh possibilities, of bonds strengthened by the storms they had weathered together. And under the starry sky of Aspen, Emily knew with the certainty only the heart can offer that no matter what the future held, they would face it together. Her mother, James, and Max, the silent guardian whose unfailing instinct had saved not just their lives, but the promise of a new dawn for all of them. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe.